Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. We have a Division video on the chopping block. If you're new to the Gamer Dad channel, this is basically what we do here. Talk about the Division mainly and other video games around the gaming world and gaming scene. Today we have basically a discussion on the Division Heartland and its delay. I'm kind of late on this, but all I did was just make a short mention of this phenomenon. That's what I call it, on Twitter, where I just said, I guess they're going to get more development time on the project. And so that was something that, a lot of people have been talking about in terms of different proxies. Some people have said, they think it needs more work. Some people have said, perhaps it may be something where they have to go back to the drawing board and restructure all of that stuff. And I just thought it was quite interesting because, they were talking as if this game was going to be coming out very soon, yet it doesn't appear to be the game is going to be reaching our hands, anytime soon. They actually said in I would say, I think it was the investor's call that they actually provided a better forecast for it. And one of those things is with game development, you can assume or you can probably hope that you're going to get your product out in due time, but it may not pan out that way. I think this whole issue from 2020 with the medical and all that stuff has taught us differently. So what does this all mean if you kind of put it in a grand scheme of things? Well, the first thing is it's being worked on by Ubisoft Red Storm. Now, the question is we don't know if Red Storm is working with any other studio on this project. Nowadays, I find it hard to actually say, oh, this Division, content is being worked on by this one studio, or any Ubisoft content at all, or video game is being worked on by one particular studio. I think what Ubisoft does is they'll spearhead the studio with one, or the project with one studio, and then have other studios back them up. Usually you don't know much about these other studios until you get to about release. And so this is what I see. Even if it may be, a free-to-play game or whatever it is, there usually is that kind of a collaboration that goes on, because that helps to drive the production of the games faster. It's their pipeline. And so this is what pretty much you're going to be seeing. Now, the big question, though, is, with the delay and all of the above, what are they trying to achieve at Red Storm with this game, and that's the thing. We haven't necessarily seen anything that's been publicly shown or officially shown in regard to Heartland. In the case of X-Defiant, the X-Defiant team had allowed for some content creators to be able to kind of showcase some footage, I think, that was given to them, or they had to, or they recorded or something. So that's actually more public than Heartland's is, if you get what I mean. And so with that going on, you kind of have to ask yourself the question, okay, does this mean Heartland is probably going back to the drawing board, or everything is being fine-tuned? And is it going to be an organic successor to the Division 2 as this, kind of a separate but part of the ecosystem, and is quite familiar to gamers and players? I don't know how this is going to pan out, but I'm hoping that it has some level of continuity, if not in story, because it's being set in a different world, but at least in terms of gameplay and mechanics and, open world immersion and atmosphere. These are some really important things with the Division. Division 1 set the bar really high, and that's where I want to segue into this particular aspect of the conversation. I'm of the opinion that Ubisoft, Massive, and Red Storm should at least have continued with the Division 1 ecosystem. Now, I know some of you are going to yell just hearing me say that, because for the longest time, I've always appreciated the Division 2, and I still do. Don't get me wrong. I'm still happy that that game dropped. No doubt am I going to take all of this back. This is just one of those, if we could go back in time and things would be done differently, that can be done, that cannot be done differently because it's already done, so we can't undo it. This is just one of those conversations. Now, in what capacity am I talking about this? Is it in the capacity of saying the Division 2 should never have been made? Or is it in the capacity of saying that this game should have basically been the only Division game that we have? Now, here's the capacity of which I'm actually making that statement. I feel like the Division 2 should have been left in the cooker for a little bit longer, based on a strategic planning that the game should have had at least a 2 to 3 year solid and actually grounded window that they had right out the door. You see, to me, I don't think everything was in play when the Division released, the Division 2 released. Division 1, yes, nothing was all in play. We know that. But the Division 2's production seemed a little accelerated, and when Marco Style and some of these other folk who were streaming the game on release day when they got to the end game, they realized that the so-called, invasion content was not even ready. I think that was the very first sign, but you know how grindy the Division 2 is. They had made the game super grindy, so that kind of camouflaged the fact that we didn't necessarily have any end game content, even though Julian Garrity had said they were thinking about the game from an end game perspective. My critique to that is I don't think they thought long enough as to what end game content will look like in the Division 2. Hence, if the Division 2 had been delayed perhaps 8 months or one more year, I think we would have been in a whole different place. While the Division, they could have continued its support in terms of adding, say, some events, maybe doing a few things, and not necessarily expanding heavily on the Division 1's map if they didn't want to. I mean, if they wanted to, they could have done that or whatever, but, it's their choice. But keeping the Division 2 in the oven for an extra year would have really been helpful, because that would have meant the game was going to be coming out in, say, 2020, which would have been a very good thing. So we would have had content ready to go. Even at the time of Warlords of New York, the Division would have still been fresh. And even by now, where we've had to stay 6 months or so, we would have had enough content, say something along the lines of Warlords of New York, and even the summit, and even hardcore mode, not in beta. I think there would have been time to get all these things done if there perhaps was some measure of, I would say, patience, or some measure of just saying, investors have to kind of take the backseat a little bit and let Ubisoft pretty much plan out this game all down the road. And the envy for me, or something that I'm kind of envious about, is when other Ubisoft games come out, it almost always looks like they have a lot of things planned out way ahead of time, and they are delivering on it, because I think those studios kind of over the years have kind of gotten their act together in what they need to get, ready so that their players and their audiences can have content. And I'm speaking of simply Assassin's Creed. I mean, if you look at Valhalla, if you look at, Odyssey, they had it seemed anyways, I don't know if I can say definitively that they had everything planned out and ready to go, but it just seemed like they did. I mean, Wrath of the Druids, Assassin's Creed Valhalla content, they even have the, the Discovery Tour, which they had also for Odyssey and all the other, the other Assassin's Creed game, Origins, and they did a good job in just deploying the content. Now, yes, you could judge the quality of the content however you want, but it doesn't necessarily take away from the fact that there was something to always do in these games. Look at Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs had its events, had all of those things, and they were ready and good to go. It just seemed like the Division constantly, would have setbacks and have delays and all of the above. And I guess we can call it maybe the growing pains of Massive, as in quote, much more of a younger studio taking on its own IP. And I'm not saying Massive is young. I'm just saying compared to, say, Ubisoft Montreal or Ubisoft Paris, or all the other, Ubisoft studios that have been making a lot of the IPs that have had many iterations and have been working on different projects, they kind of seem to have things in order. Their own schematics or their own, game plan seems to be much more solid. So right now, I think this is what we're seeing right now. We don't seem to have a solid game plan within Massive. We seem to have a lot of competence in terms of design, in terms of wonderful world, AI, all of those things that make a game really solid. But again, we don't necessarily have that futuristic thinking. I think what Massive may need is somebody who is in the role of a decision maker that can actually craft 5-6 year plans for the studio and implement contingencies in case anything goes wrong. Everything can actually work out for the studio, because once this whole thing hit in 2020 with the pandemic, it was a mess. It really exposed a lot of the deficiencies of a lot of game development crews, and it actually revealed the strengths of some others, like Valhalla, which had been in production, was about to be finished, and then the whole pandemic hit. And what did they do? They just made adjustments and they were able to finish the game. Yes, I'm sure Ubisoft may have thrown more resources their way, but they already had things in place to go. And even with a lot of games being delayed, Ubisoft studios were still able to bring out 3 whole AAA games. So I think that's something that's really interesting. Whereas in the case of the Division, it just didn't seem like they had things in place to go along with. Now, case in point, if you remember when I actually showed you, a few things, about the February and why I thought, February was going to be a weird month, you have Destiny 2. This is going to be a very interesting one that I want to talk about in a separate video because this video is already run too long. But talk to me in the comment section. Do you think that the developers should have actually had more in place for everyone? Or do you think the circumstances were just too tough nonetheless? Even if they had had contingencies, we would have still seen delays, depending on how things ran. I mean, we can't say what would have happened, but this is just a conversation to put things in perspective, and hopefully, they can take these lessons and take them to their other video games that they're making. Right now, they're in the works for developing 2 solid games. In my mind, I think they're developing a Division 3, but again, that's just my opinion nonetheless. Thank you so much for watching the video. Thanks for indulging me. If you enjoyed the content, you can subscribe. You can also hit the like button if it's something you wish to do. I'll talk to you guys in another video. Peace out.